some of which you likely never bothered to learn because they had such wildly arcane names like dysprosium and ytterbium. But if you're building an electric vehicle and you need a way to keep your neodymium magnets from weakening under extreme temperatures, you are heat-proofing with dysprosium. If US Marines are carrying out a nighttime raid and those soldiers need night vision goggles, you're converting infrared light into something visible with terbium. China recently added 7 new categories of rare earths to a list of controlled materials, which now requires US companies that need them to get a license for them.
You should see these new additions to China's export control regime for critical minerals not as more paperwork that will result in additional exports of these, but is essentially a ban.
They're realizing that they don't have to respond on the same level playing field of tariff for tariff. Instead, they have other tools they can use to impose costs on the United States.
This latest move adds to a growing list of rare earths China has either restricted or actually banned the export of to the United States. And experts say China has tailored this list of raw materials to exactly what the US needs. Some American aerospace manufacturers, for example, build avionics using materials that are sole sourced from China.
It's a real choke point. The US and others have stockpiles, but they will go through those stockpiles relatively quickly. And the Chinese are counting on this being one pressure point to get the US to back off or to sit down.
And if you want to understand what direction China's actions are taking the country, it's also worth paying attention to their words, branding US tariffs as abuse, which severely infringes upon the legitimate rights and interests of all countries, severely violates World Trade Organization rules, severely undermines the rules-based multilateral trading system, and severely disrupts the global economic order. It goes on to warn, economic bullying that shifts risks onto others will ultimately backfire.
They've been accusing the US of bullying ever since the initial trade war. They want to be respected. They want to feel like they can have a two-sided, not a one-sided negotiation over these issues, and they don't want to feel threatened by the US.
Well, China is, on the one hand, obviously having to take a more assertive posturing against US escalation. China is also essentially appealing to the rest of the world.
Trump believes China has badly cheated the United States. He accuses China of flooding world markets with unfairly subsidized cheap goods, which wreaks havoc on a country's ability to manufacture and provide for itself because they just can't compete.
As long as this trade remains unbalanced, I think the threat or the potentiality for additional tariffs will be there.
And you recall that chart we showed you earlier about how much more the US buys from China than it sells to China. The US running a trade deficit of nearly $300 billion. Trump sees that as proof that China must be ripping the US off.
Trade deficits are no longer merely an economic problem. They're a national emergency that threatens our security and our very way of life.
But every expert we've ever talked to on this subject says that's entirely the wrong way to look at it.
There's nothing inherently good or bad about a trade surplus or a deficit. The United States has had a trade deficit pretty much since the end of the Second World War. Why is that? Because they're richer than any other country, so they buy more stuff.
Just to use an analogy, we as households, we as consumers, we have trade surpluses and trade deficits with different entities in the economy. Most of us run a massive trade deficit with our grocery store.